following episode of Jordan's Soapbox discusses a variety of complex and disturbing political, religious, and social topics in this episode. I've done my best to be as thorough as possible, but I nonetheless encourage you to read more about the topics with the further reading section of this video. I do not condone the harassment of any individuals discussed here, and do not seek them out. It is not worth it. While I've done my best to talk about these topics in a sensitive manner, viewer discretion is nonetheless advised. Originally, this video was meant to be a remake of a video I made last year talking about the controversy surrounding Mike Pollock, the current English voice actor for Dr. Eggman. He had been in controversy due to his vocal views about the ongoing Israel-Hamas war and associated topics. It was an idea that I had kicked around for some time since the original video sucked due to a lack of context, to say the least, and that video ended up being privated. That video is now in the description of this one as a historical artifact, albeit unlisted. Please don't watch it. But while preparing to work on the script for Mobius 25 years later, events transpired that made a broader look at the topic not only relevant, but absolutely necessary. Because this is more than just a controversy surrounding a voice actor. It's the issue of rabid anti-Semitism within the Sonic community. It's not often talked about, but that's why we're here today. But first, to talk about anti-Semitism within the Sonic community, we need a brief rundown of Jews, Zionism, and the State of Israel. I know it's a bit of a history lesson, but it is important to what we'll be talking about. So class is now in session. Please don't fall asleep during it. Jews, which include yours truly, can be broadly speaking an ethno-religious group that is at the intersection of ethnicity, religion, and culture. Some Jews hit 1, 2, or all 3 of those boxes. For instance, while I'm not religiously Jewish, I'm still ethnically and culturally Jewish. We used to have a nation which is referred to as Ancient Israel, and the hub of religious and cultural life was the Second Temple. Its destruction in 70 AD during the Jewish-Roman Wars, we were under Roman occupation at the time, and the failed Bar Kokhba revolt, I hope I got that right, resulted in the Jewish diaspora, as those who weren't murdered by the Romans were kicked out of our homeland and spread into other areas of the world. We never forgot about our homeland though, as demonstrating the customs and traditions of what was now Rabbinic Judaism, and hoped one day to return to it, because elsewhere wasn't great to say the least. We faced discrimination, violence, death,
nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition,
and more death in the subsequent centuries. But it really started to escalate in the 19th century, when the Russian Empire unleashed, often state-sanctioned, waves of violent attacks on Jews called pogroms. Even when the Russian Empire finally collapsed in 1917, the ensuing Russian Civil War saw the same thing occurring by the Red Army and other entities in what is now Western Ukraine and Belarus. The latter is where my great-grandparents were, who during the violence fled to the United States before it cracked down on Jewish immigration in 1924. But for other Jews, there was a different idea: returning to our homeland. Enter Zionism, everyone's favorite topic. Zionism is incredibly difficult to talk about because it has definitions based on multiple schools of thought, such as, and not limited to, labor, revisionist, reform, cultural, and the list goes on. Seriously, like there is a lot of them. But to use the Encyclopedia Britannica definition, it was at a time a movement to create a Jewish state in what was now Ottoman Syria. The idea was that we would never be safe as minorities in other countries, so returning to our indigenous homeland seemed like it was a good idea, because what was Palestine was tossed around more than a hot potato before eventually being in the hands of the Ottoman Empire. It was poor, illiterate, disease-infested, and no hope whatsoever for any future societal advancement. For context, Mark Twain basically called it a shithole. I'm serious, this is the quote. It's funny in a dark way. There was not even a state to speak of for the few people unfortunately still living there. Jews returning there developed and purchased land legally either from Ottoman authorities or Christian Arab tenants who weren't even living there because, you know, it's basically hell. Ottoman Palestine eventually had been replaced with mandatory Palestine after the conclusion of World War I. Yeah, this is where the delightful British comes in, covered with oil in this tinderbox. Britain had contradictory promises to the Jews for a national home with the Balfour Declaration, and the Arabs with correspondence promising Arab independence with the Sharif of Mecca. all because they wanted to win World War I. Yeah. Britain did little to resolve the obvious competing interests between Jews and Arabs that would result in violence, riots, and a failed Arab revolt in 1939. Britain severely restricted Jewish immigration afterwards, which was, at the worst possible time because events over in Europe, due to a ridiculous Jew-hating, mustache-wearing Austrian man, would make things catastrophically deadly. The Holocaust, or the Shoah in Hebrew, resulted in the mass murder of 6 million Jews. This included 3 members of my own family in Lithuania who did not flee elsewhere in time. The thousands of years of discrimination, violence, and death led to this, the near extinction of European Jews. They lost everything: family, friends, homes, and livelihoods. How could Jews find a home there now after all of this? Even for the Jews attempting to return home, they were met with more violence and other countries refused to take them in. Zionism suddenly was not viewed as a far-fetched idea, but an absolute necessity considering the circumstances. Britain did not want to ease immigration controls in mandatory Palestine, pissing off the United States, and escalating violence on both sides resulted in Britain washing their hands over the whole affair. They turned it over to the newly created United Nations, who divided mandatory Palestine into 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab, with Jerusalem being an international city. Considering the complicated circumstances, I think it seems like a pretty good idea. Too bad the Arabs didn't think that. The Arabs hated it, rejected it, and declared war on Israel as soon as its independence was declared in accordance with that UN plan. The Arabs would lose that war and subsequent wars against Israel, creating the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict that would involve states, terrorist groups, and other actors. Fun. I'm skimming over most of what happened since then, this section's pretty long as is, with one notable exception: the Six-Day War in 1967. The conclusion is basically the reason we're in this hot mess right now. Israel, as a result of the war, occupied the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. I want to make it clear these 2 areas are indisputably earmarked for a future Palestinian state, and we should not be there. I understand these territories were initially won by war, but nonetheless, to resolve the conflict requires a Palestinian state. Israel would disengage from the Gaza Strip in 2005, which, hey, maybe a similar action could be done in the West Bank. But what was supposed to be a hopeful moment in the Israel-Palestinian conflict, especially due to the recent violence before this, turned into a nightmare when the terrorist organization Hamas violently seized control of the Gaza Strip, who made it very clear they hated Jews and they hated Israel and wanted to destroy it. Israel and Hamas had fought in several wars since then, with attempts to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict basically being on hiatus. Hamas then unleashed a deadly terrorist attack on October 7th, 2023, from here on out we're just going to call it October 7th, that resulted in the deaths of hundreds of civilians, including women and children. The resulting war between Israel and Hamas finally uncorked the bottle of anti-Semitism long brewing within the Sonic community. But, we need to quickly talk about anti-Zionism.
Well, this sucks.
The following examples are a newer example of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. It attacks the very idea of Israel existing as a state and willfully calls for its destruction. You know, a state that mostly has Jews. It's often used to attack anyone merely supporting the existence of Israel or anything Jewish, often leading to invoking tropes and activities that are absolutely anti-Semitic. For instance, Borough Park in New York, with a large Orthodox Jewish population, was flooded with protests about a cancelled real estate in Israel event, with such lovely scenes as this. Others shouted insults, including at children. One man called neighborhood residents filthy Zionist assholes, and a woman shouted at a pair of young girls watching from a crosswalk, saying, "You're so gross, you're disgusting." Children on their way home from neighborhood yeshivas peered out their bus windows at the scene. Remember, these are Orthodox Jews that they're attacking here. Jews. Difficult conversations and criticism of Israel can still occur without resorting to anti-Zionism, which is effectively anti-Semitism with a new coat of paint. It also, as we will see, is often used to justify horrendous views and actions against Jews, anything Jewish, or anything Israeli without understanding the full complexity of the topic. Oh, speaking of which...
Oh no,
On October 12, 2023, Paramount Pictures, the production company behind the Sonic the Hedgehog films, released a statement condemning the October 7th attacks on Israel. The statement encouraged folks to support 4 different charities: Magin David Adom, Nadal, the UJA Federation of New York, and Save the Children. Of the charities listed, Save the Children explicitly helps Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, but the Sonic community used it to attack Paramount Pictures, even though none of these mentioned charities are supporting the military of Israel. I was extremely confused. Why was there so much backlash over a statement that was likely the most basic a company could make when it comes to October 7th? This statement later came up again the following year when the episode of the Knuckles series, The Shabbat Dinner, came out. It was a beautiful episode focusing on the Jewish tradition of Shabbat, and was probably one of my favorite episodes of the whole series, especially considering the fact that other depictions of Judaism in Sonic up to this point have been, shall we say, not great. Needless to say, the community hated it, saying it was pro-Israel propaganda, and used that statement as evidence. Despite the fact the only time the episode itself mentioned something related to Israel was Wade's mom learning Krav Maga, which is a self-defense style that has its origins in the Israeli Defense Force in the 1950s. Really, it was just an excuse on the writer's part for Wade's mom to kick butt alongside Knuckles in the closing scene. But honestly, if folks were trying to hide their thinly veiled anti-Semitism due to the Jewish focus of the episode, they really were failing miserably. One of my biggest memories during this time was conversations with Peach Does Art, a former secondary artist who worked on Cyberpunk Jordan. I was criticizing the response to Paramount Pictures' statement on Twitter. Peach Does Art responded by saying, quote, "If you financially support Israel, you are supporting Israel to continue the genocide. Supporting Israel financially is morally bankrupt and should be boycotted when possible. All of these organizations were supporting civilians, including Palestinians. Their response? A dime towards Israel is a dime poor spent. I don't give a fuck where it went to. It didn't belong in their pockets. There's people dying from airstrikes, children are starving, any aid to Israel is aid they do not deserve. Full stop." Needless to say, our work relationship and friendship did not last much longer due to his increasingly volatile anti-Zionist rhetoric. But it was shocking to me how folks legitimately believe this. Like, I couldn't fathom it. These were civilians. A company supporting civilians was a cause of criticism. You could chalk this up to the credible rise of anti-Semitism since Elon Musk took over Twitter, but based on my experiences elsewhere, that wasn't the case. Because it wasn't only on Twitter. The Sonic Wiki Zone is a prominent wiki on fandom focusing on Sonic the Hedgehog. Like a lot of other communities, they have a Discord server. I usually lurk in these servers, occasionally chatting and advertising my stuff. Awesome Time 2 is a Sonic artist on Twitter infamous for holding homophobic and transphobic views. If that name sounds familiar, it's because he rightfully caught the fandom's ire by drawing several female Sonic OCs from various folks in compromising positions without their consent. Yikes! Anyway, while we were mutuals for a time, once I caught wind of that homophobic, transphobic mentality, I told them to knock it off. And when they didn't, I publicly called him out for it and disassociated with him. I thought that would be the end of it, but a Syrian Arab moderator named Cited, the ultimate for the Sonic Wiki Zone, DM'd me on Discord saying, quote, "Awesome Time is a dear friend of ours, and I'd like to believe that if anyone attacks him, he'd be upsetting the majority of the people there. What you did was not cool at all." Yes, because I criticized him for his horrendous views. Like, I'd understand if it was for a frivolous matter, but his views were absolutely repulsive and still are. I blocked him and explained to another moderator about the situation, but needless to say, I don't think anything was actually done about it. I then released the original Mike Pollock video, which, at the time, I felt was neutral enough to share with other servers. While most other servers had no issue with it, this one did. I was banned immediately after sharing it without so much as a warning. I had a feeling this was due to bias, as one of the moderators already made it clear they hated me because I spoke out against his friend, who is such an upstanding member of this community. It could also be due to unspoken anti-Semitism, as those in the Arab world tend to have extremely negative perceptions of Jews compared to other countries in the world. Now, the data I've cited from the ADL does not include Syria, likely due to the ongoing conflict there, but the entire Middle East is like this. Not everyone holds these anti-Semitic views, of course. It's not cool for me to broadly categorize an entire region. But they are prevalent, and it needs to be considered when these kind of events happen. So, yeah, either way you slice it, that's not really great. Howdy everybody, Jordan here with a very quick post-production update since I didn't find out about this until after I recorded everything. See, the Ultimate has actually been banned from not only the Discord server, but from the Sonic Wiki zone as a whole. That ban is until May 30th, 2025, and the ban message specifically states that he, quote, ignored warnings of repeated harassment, antagonizing staff, and spamming offsite drama, banned with consensus of admins and Phantom's community manager. When you also look at the Discord server now, it is completely different. There's no older messages, I think before June 2024. This incident occurred in May 2024. So, yeah, it seems to be a completely different server with different staff now, so this incident doesn't seem to reflect the server now, at least to what I know. Yeah, that's about it. Back to the video. But surely that was an isolated incident, right? Right? Archie Sonic Forever was a fan continuation of Archie Sonic. It was unique that, unlike other fan revivals such as Archie Sonic Online, it took a different path by starting the point of divergence earlier at Sonic the Hedgehog 241. I received a handful of requests to cover ASF, and at some point I was going to do so. It had a Discord server that I was an active member in, and things seemed to be going well for it. Until things crashed and burned. The comic was cancelled. Yeah, this is likely news to all of you because neither on the official accounts or elsewhere did they ever announce the comic was cancelled. I am sorry to be the bearer of bad news. It never is a cause to celebrate when a fan revival decides to call it quits. ASF would later rebrand. The Discord server originally was meant to be deleted due to ASF ending to Head Pigeons, with the purpose of promoting several projects by former ASF staff. Now, as an early preview of how terrible this Discord server was, one of those projects was allegedly an incest comic starring Mega Man and Roll from the Mega Man series. I am serious. I have to say allegedly because I don't have the original messages anymore, but I'm almost certain it happened. Allegedly, Amy, who formerly went by June, she was a main artist and writer on ASF, tried to allegedly justify it by saying it was exploring trans identity, and you know what, fuck that shit, these are minors as far as I'm aware, and even if they weren't, that is disgusting. I had very obvious reservations, pointing out how that was very bad, and I don't think that was the most appropriate subject matter for a comic involving minors. But if that wasn't bad, it was their insistence on political purity. ASF apparently, according to Scarlett, who also worked on ASF and was one of the moderators there, frequently banned multiple folks early on in its history. Now, I have no idea whether these bans are legitimate or not, but to say that is, kinda concerning. Like, that's not really normal at all for a Sonic server. I was aware that unlike other Sonic servers which ban political discussions for this reason, the server was left-leaning. But when it came to Israel, even expressing support for its general existence while also supporting a two-state solution, the most ice-cool of positions, seemed to be too much for them. Eventually, the moderators did not want me talking about anything related to Israel, even if it was non-political. Which is fine, I don't mind not talking about it. I am well aware it is a very heated topic right now. Jewish topics were still allowed, although I find it ironic since the two are closely interwoven with each other. But everything exploded one fateful day when discussions about Mike Pollock being potentially recast came about. Yep, I've been around the bush for too long. It's time to talk about Mike Pollock.
I've come to make an announcement.
For those who don't know, Mike Pollock is the American voice actor for Dr. Eggman. He also starred in other cinematic classics such as Ratatouille.
Hey, Marshall! We need you here right away! We had an accident in the kitchen!
He started in 2024 to be more vocal for the release of hostages currently being held by Hamas. I stand by my criticism of the community for how they initially responded to him. However, I will argue he has not helped matters since then, calling Palestinians collateral damage, his obsession with arguing with people, and his overall asshole demeanor, which apparently has been a thing for a while, has actually made me agree with people that he should be recasted. Cold day in hell, I know. At this point, he just brings so much unnecessary controversy to the role that he should just be let go from it. I know that would give anti-Zionists, anti-Semites a field day, but this is where we are at the moment. During the conversation that occurred in the server, I stated that while I may agree with Mike Pollock on some political points, I had to be vague due to the topic ban on Israel. There's a lot I don't agree with, and someone else should take the role. Now, that doesn't seem too bad, does it? Not for Sonic forever. When I shared that initial opinion, one particular user named EP got extremely angry and started arguing with me. I couldn't figure out why. User was new and hadn't been on the server before prior. This was my first time seeing him. Who was this guy and why was he so angry at me? I did eventually clarify what I meant in the conversation because my initial statement wasn't really worded the best because of the topic ban. And Scarlet decided to kick me from the server saying they were an anti-Zionist pro-Palestinian server. Hey Scarlet, it was never stated in the rules when I was there that was the case, because otherwise I would have left much sooner and left you to your alleged incest comic. I did have a follow-up conversation with Scarlet standing by what I said and stating that I did not want to return to the server as I viewed anti-Zionism, as established, as anti-Semitism. I did not have hard feelings, I wished her the best of luck, and hoped to remain on somewhat friendly terms. Nah. They decided to block me on everything, including the Sonic Forever account, which hadn't even posted since February 2024. I later found out that Scarlet justified attacks on me. Quote, EP, I prefer people not to be afraid of personal attacks. Right energy attacking someone who was supporting Zionism and encouraging people to attack others who were pro-Palestine in the context of discussing that. So yeah, Nazis should be made to be afraid. Right target, right reason. I'm flabbergasted. I considered you a friend. But to call me a Nazi? As someone who is the great-grandson of Holocaust victims? Someone whose grandfathers fought in World War II for one to be permanently disabled by a Nazi? For me to advocate time and again for peace on both sides of this conflict? You're utterly vile, cruel, and stupid. This conversation was made even worse by EP having an implied death threat towards me. Now, I don't have evidence of the following conversations, so I have to use the word alleged here. But EP later posted an All Nazis Should Die poster using the character from the recent DC Creature Commandos. Remember, they insinuated before that I was a Nazi, so basically, they're calling me a Nazi and allegedly saying I should die. Cool. Whatever the case is, who is EP? EP is not EP, but a different user altogether. They used a lot of different alternate accounts because they've routinely been banned on multiple servers, but for the purposes of this video, we're just going to stick with the one that I know the most. Iron Pie. He was someone that started talking to me over on Sonic Online, and we started having friendly conversations. But more and more, he started to be socially parasitic and argumentative, especially about the chubby version of Sally Acorn I introduced on Jordan's Soapbox. So I decided to block him because I just can't deal with that. I do like some separation, and especially because I'm busy with other things, I do need some space sometimes. I thought that was the end. Nope! He would end up joining on an alt account not long after and yelled at me saying how I was promoting a fetish with Sally Acorn being chubby and my opinion was wrong about the slap. Sure, because chubby women don't exist and I can't have opinions on Sonic media. Sure. I finally decided to talk to Dr. Z, the admin of ASO, and they banned his ass pretty quickly. So, how do I know that EP and Iron Pie are the same person? Well, let's just say I found out through the grapevine he started complaining about ASO and having the very same criticism about my chubby version of Sally being a fetish. I am almost 100% sure it's him, and I'm not going to be using allegedly for this one. If I'm wrong, then I am, but it would explain a lot. Now, in fairness to ASF, they probably have no idea about this, so I'm gonna give them a little bit of leeway here, because this guy has made multiple accounts and he's genuinely an asshole. But to support and encourage this kind of behavior. Hey folks, Jordan here, yet again with another post-production update. So, while editing this, I did join another Discord server that was Sonic-centered, and EP happened to be in this server. But not as EP as Lily. Although I am pretty sure it is either A, the same account, or B, it's another alt account. I'm thinking it's the earlier. The reason why I know it's them is, number one, they have the same profile picture of Angel Dust from Has Been Hotel. One of their other alt accounts also has this picture, so I'm 100% positive it's them. Also, they also are complaining about the same things as they always do, me, Archie Sonic Online, etc. Once I found out about this, I did call them out on it, and yeah, that went about as well as you expect. To this day, they are still in that server complaining about me. Literally, I'm recording this on February 28th, 2025, and they literally posted this at 4:10 p.m. saying a lot of fucks, but one of them was, "Fuck Cyberpunk Jordan." Oh, get a life, man. Get a life. Also, apparently they go by she, her pronouns, and I didn't realize that until well after I recorded all of this, so oops. Anyway, let's wrap this up. That was, quite a journey, wasn't it? So, what do we take away from all this? Because these examples, to me, indicate a broad trend of anti-Semitism, intentional or not, from the Sonic community. From the dismissal of Israeli civilians, the attacking of representations of Judaism within Sonic, the lack of care of those being held and murdered by Hamas, the whataboutism, and the calls for the destruction of a Jewish state. It's terrible. But what's even more terrible is I'm sure none of what I've just talked about would convince anybody that's already made up their mind on it. So, why make this video? Why go through all the trouble to do this if I know it's not going to matter? Yeah, the best case scenario is that some of these individuals that we discussed are no longer going to have creative careers after this. But I doubt that's going to happen. Instead, for me, it's the realization that I don't belong in the Sonic community. I'll never be accepted for being who I am in this community. I'm Jewish. I'm a Zionist. It doesn't matter whether you believe in a two-state solution, advocate for the well-being of Palestinians, or anything. No matter how much you will try to compromise, you will be met with backlash and calls for your destruction. I learned that over these past couple years. And I've come to a realization. I no longer want to try to reason with insanity. I still love Sonic the Hedgehog. I've never been more passionate about this little blue blur that has meant so much to me and changed my life for the better. I'm still making Jordan's Soapbox, Jordan's Tea, and a bunch of other Sonic projects that I'm working on. But after all this, I can no longer associate with the larger community. I will still work with its members, some of whom I'm fortunate enough to call friends, but it's clear I belong elsewhere. I'm aware of what this video is going to do. It's likely going to cause more backlash, possibly more death threats, and a bunch of other stuff that's largely unpleasant for me. I've accepted it. The road ahead is long and difficult, but I must walk it. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I promise this is an exception to the usual content that I make, and I'll see you next time, on better circumstances.